Okay. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ta'ala wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. So, hope everybody's okay, inshallah. I had to take a break last week. I wasn't feeling 100%. Had a bad week. Affected loads of things. So anyway, inshallah, back to normal. I seem to find something every week now to I don't know, like focus on, which seems to slow down the progress of the text, which is right at the end now. Like literally, you can finish in 2 or 3 sessions, but I don't know. Allah, I guess that's just that's just how it's supposed to be. I guess. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So Imam al-Muhasibi says, he says, ورع حق الجار والمسكين والقريب وأدب أهلك وارفق بما ملكت يمينك وكن قواما بالنشاط كما أمرك وإذا حركت لخير فتعجله وما اشتبه عليك فدعه والزم الرحمة للمؤمنين وقل الحق حيثما كنت ولا تكثر الأيمان وإن كنت صادقا واحذر التوسع في المنطق وإن كنت بليغا وإياك والتكلف في الدين وإن كنت عالما وقدم العلم قبل كل مقال والزم الإشفاق بعد الاجتهاد ودار الناس ما سلم لك الدين واحذر المداهنة أصلا. Okay, so inshallah, probably won't get around to that second or third paragraph, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, he says, and be mindful of the right of the neighbor, the poor person, and the relative. And I would probably say that this should be in the reverse order. Maybe the neighbor and the relative are similar, but it should be in the reverse order, because I think if you consider the overall picture, then the relative comes first, right? Then the neighbor, then the miskin, then the poor person. Obviously, in any given situation, it could be any order. Somebody in more immediate need, who has some sort of a right over you, is more important than somebody else. So, obviously that goes without saying. But he mentions those 3 people in particular. I'm not going to go into too much discussion about the neighbor, simply because I think we all know. I think we all know what it means to be a good neighbor. I think we all know how important it is to be a good neighbor in Islam, right? And the Prophet ﷺ was reported to have stressed the importance of the neighbor so much that the Sahaba felt that he would give the neighbor a share of inheritance, right? The Prophet ﷺ spoke about the person whose neighbor is not safe from his misdemeanor or his mistreatment, his ill treatment, is incomplete in faith, doesn't have faith, right? And so on. So it's really, really strongly emphasized. And the Quran speaks about a kind of an order of ihsan towards people. So it says, "U'budullaha وبالوالدين إحسانا وبذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين والجار ذي القربى والجار الجنب والصاحب بالجنب وابن السبيل وما ملكت أيمانكم. So al-muhasibi is mentioning three, but you could add these, consider these three to be part of that, or representative of that wider list. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, clearly one of our primary objectives, and then move straight on to this principle of ihsan. This is not ihsan as discussed in terms of the spiritual development ihsan. It is the social dimension of ihsan. In fact, if I might put it this way, so if you guys have heard the word ihsan used before, most famously, the word ihsan is used in the context of the hadith of Jibreel. Okay, so let's go into that for a second. So in the hadith Jibreel, famously, the Prophet ﷺ was visited by Jibreel in the form of a human being, perhaps a companion, and the Sahaba were confused by, by the fact that he was unknown to them, yet he appeared to be untraveled, meaning he appeared like he had just come from home, freshly cleaned, and and bathed and so on. He had very white clothes, no sign that as if he'd just stopped and got refreshed and had a change of clothes somewhere. But nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew that there was a guest, in a close-knit community, like that. So to get to the point, Jibreel asked the Prophet ﷺ a few questions about Islam. All right, he went right up to the Prophet ﷺ, asking questions, and he asked him, what is Islam, what is Iman, what is Ihsan, and when will the end of time come? Or what, the hour, when will the hour come? So the answer to the first question was the 5 pillars. The answer to the second question was the pillars of Iman, which you know and we've discussed many times. The answer to Ihsan was that you worship Allah as though you see him, and if not, then Allah always sees you. To be really pedantic in translation, you could say, "U'bud Allah ka'annaka tarahu," worship Allah as though you see him. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. If you cannot be such that it's though you see him, then he sees you. At least keep that in mind. And both are states of mindfulness. They are states of divine awareness, divine consciousness inside of the slave that result in a mode of behavior. It's got nothing to do with imagination. It's not about imagining Allah, but it's about imagining yourself. So the object of seeing, كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ, the object here is not worship Allah as though you're looking at Allah, with the object of your imagination being Allah. So the object of your imagination isn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The object of your imagination is you. Very important, right? So anyway, so the point is that's ihsan, that level of mindfulness is ihsan. However, ihsan is discussed in 2 ways. Both the word itself, but obviously it has a broad understanding. It has a broad sense, linguistic sense. So therefore, it simply means to beautify, to accept, to make something excellent, to make something beautiful. So it goes without saying that anything done from a spiritual standpoint anyway, and from the standpoint of doing things to as close to perfection as possible. Clearly, a person who behaved as though they were in the actual presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so profoundly so that they themselves could see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that person's behavior and conduct in every area, whether it was their salah and their khushu', which we spoke about last week, or whether it was any other matter in their life, it would be the absolute best that they could deliver, because they're absolutely 100% in tune with the fact that they're in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if that's too much for a person to get to, then at least, which is really just a step below, just a difference in emphasis and perspective, which is that recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always sees what you do, right? So that's very broad. It can cover everything. The Quran speaks about this other dimension of ihsan, using the word ihsan, right? So, for example, with regards to parents, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَبِذِي الْقُرْبَى وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. That's actually the verse. I think I misquoted the verse before slightly. Worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and behave with ihsan, using the word ihsan. Behave with ihsan towards your parents, right? Worship Allah, don't commit shirk. Behave with ihsan towards your parents and all those other people. So the point I wanted to make is, so here you have ihsan as this huge, and elevated spiritual maqam, spiritual station, spiritual experience, because it is an experience to get to a point where a person's worship is like that, is to really get to a point of presence in the moment, and the point of awareness of Allah's presence, and a point of mindfulness that probably not many people have experienced. From a subjective point of view, like they haven't experienced it themselves. We've not got there. We've not tried to get there. If you have, mashallah, I haven't, right? Because I can't. It's very difficult, right? Not that I haven't tried, but it's very difficult to reach that level of mindfulness, because we're being asked to imagine what we might be like if we were in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have no recollection of that experience, meaning it's not something that I've done before. It's not something you've done before. So we have to recreate something that hasn't happened, that we haven't experienced prior, and so therefore we are trying to imagine it, but we're trying to imagine ourselves in that position, in that situation. And then we're asking ourselves, okay, what would I behave like if I could see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And then we bring that behavior onto us. Then we recreate that behavior in our salah, or in our worship, in our dhikr, in our tilawah, or in our daily lives. And how do you, okay, maybe you can focus on trying to create that in your salah. How do you create that in your life? How do you create that level of awareness, that level of consciousness with regards to your responsibility, that level of wakefulness, right? It's difficult, right? Essentially what you're saying is you can't have any ghafla. You can't have a heedless moment, because how can you? I mean, you wouldn't be heedless for a moment if you were constantly seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning it is it's a spiritual experience. So you have that ihsan described in such a profound way, but the Quran says ihsan is also ihsan to your parents. So to now finish off that verse, right? So ihsan to your parents, then family. So here's the Quranic order. So ihsan to your parents, then your relatives, dhil qurba, then orphans, wal-yatama, wal-masakin, the poor. I'm using the term poor to be in general terms, like people who are so poor that they don't qualify to pay zakah, they qualify to receive zakah, or they have absolutely nothing. So wal-masakin, wal-jari dhil qurba, wal-jari al-junub. So here 2 categories of neighbor are mentioned. So coming now back to the neighbors. 2 categories of neighbor. Immediate neighbor, wal-jari dhil qurba, wal-jari al-junub. So immediate neighbor, or a neighbor who is a member of your family, a neighbor who is a relative, or immediate neighbor, or jari al junub, or the next one down, right? Wasahibi bil jamb, somebody who you encounter and happen to be next to, like the person you sit next to on the bus or on the train, right? Or who you are momentarily standing behind or in front of in a queue. The person who you have an accident with, your cars, I don't know, collide, and you get out to exchange insurance details. That's sahib bil jamb. That's a person whom you have encountered. And Allah is saying, behave with ihsan towards such a person. And that's also going to be that's pretty much the overarching theme here again and again, because he's going to keep talking about things like that. And then he says, وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ وَمَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, and the traveler, وَمَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, and those who your right hands possess, i.e. your slaves. Nowadays, your employees, people who work for you, basically. Okay, so all of these people we are supposed to behave towards with ihsan. So therefore, ihsan, oh my goodness, I mean, are we talking about that ihsan? Well, in a sense, we do. I mean, what we're saying is behave with them like with an excellent standard of behavior. Or you can say it just is ihsan linguistically, which means, you know, have excellent conduct towards them. Why are these people singled out? I mean, there are obviously, you can broaden that more and more and more. Okay, but why are these people singled out? Because you find there's a number of things. A, they are people who you are connected to by blood. They're people who have had immense favor upon you. So parents, family, neighbors are people who you cannot ignore. Basically, they're people who are in a sense, who you're constantly bumping into, and they're kind of in your lives, right? You know things about them, they know things about you. So your behavior about them also has certain duties associated with it. Can you keep their secrets? Can you avoid gossiping about them? Can you avoid backbiting them because you saw something that went on in the garden, or because their children did something? Serious tests because of that proximity. And the same goes for the next neighbor down and the next neighbor down. Neighbors, therefore, in general. And you can continue by extension, you know, the neighborhood and so forth. But also, if neighbors get along, what does it mean for community? So there's wider implications to neighbors getting along. If neighbors get along, if you can get along with one neighbor, chances are you've got neighbors on either side. So if you're in a row of houses, you've got immediate neighbor on either side, right? Then you've got the next houses down, you've got the houses opposite. These are all people who you can shout across at, who you can peep through their window, whose noise you can hear from next door, who can hear your noise. If you live in a block of flats, and they can hear you if you make too much noise, you can hear them if they make too much noise. Upstairs, downstairs, you know, all of that stuff, right? You pass by their door if they're below you, bump into them in the lift, you know, and so on in the communal area. So much happens, right? That your children may be friends, not be friends, might fight, might squabble, get up to mischief together, get up to mischief against each other. So all of these implications require a high degree of good conduct that involves a multitude of characteristics, like patience, like forbearance, like forgiveness, like generosity, and all of those things. And all of those things are, if you like, contained within the meaning of ihsan. You know, you move on, right? And so then it's the poor. Poor have a right over those who have a duty towards those who don't have. It goes without saying, right? But the interesting thing here is that these things can double up. So the poor person can be a neighbor and a relative. A neighbor can be a relative and poor. So it's tripled up now, right? And so on. Then you have people who you don't know, right? Or if they're not, so you've got people you know, so your parents, your relatives, your neighbors. Then people who you may know or may not know. So just the orphans, poor people, and so on. But here as well, proximity is possible, meaning the orphan could be an orphan in your neighborhood, in your vicinity, within your circle of contacts, within your circle of influence, you know, and so on. So now what's happening is the obligation is compounding, it's doubling up. Orphan is a neighbor, is a relative, is poor and an orphan. Quadruple, right? So the layers, they compound up. Then finally you have people who you're likely to not know, just a poor person generally speaking, right? Again, overlap is possible. And then finally people who you are less likely to know, somebody you bump into, the sahib bil jamb, somebody you bump into, wabni sabil, and then people who are travelers. Ihsan is necessary towards them. Those people are people with regards to whom there are dangers, and so is the last one. The dangers are that you can't, if you mistreat, if you don't behave with ihsan towards these people, if you're not on guard with a traveler and somebody who you happen to have a chance encounter with, then whatever harm you may have caused to them, you can't undo. So there is an extra layer of danger. You do something bad with your neighbor, you can make up later. You know, they're just next door. A family member, you can give them a call. You have their number. You know who they are, and so on. But those who you don't know, there is this layer of danger. Particularly people who are traveling or who you have a chance to encounter. You can't even find them. Sometimes poor people, you know, and orphans you can access. Poor people usually sit in the same street corners, etc. You know, but so there's this interesting tertib, this interesting order to this. And finally, ma malakat aymanukum, people who work for you. Why are they mentioned here as well? Because they're the people that are vulnerable. They're the people that are vulnerable, that are often easily taken advantage of. All right, so you're not tied to them by blood, by that natural bond that ties you to your children, ties you to your relatives, your brothers and sisters, you know, your cousins and so on. You don't have, sometimes not knowing somebody is a safeguard. You don't know the person, so you don't know what's good about them, what's bad about them. You don't know the evil, you don't know their good. You have caution. Here's somebody that you know, you possess rights over, you employ them, etc. You pay their wages. I'm just sticking to the contemporary context, not going into like a slavery type situation, which is even further compounded. And you have no loyalty to them by blood. Nothing like that. There are no wider implications. You mistreat a relative, other relatives get involved. There's you know, it's messy. But an employee, not so much, right? So these people are now vulnerable in your hand. You can take advantage of them. They will put up with your nonsense because they're worried. You know, they're worried they might get the sack. So all the more reason why these people require attention. al-muhasibi is going to speak about this kind of theme, but I like thinking about this verse because I don't know. I feel like this verse has this interesting dynamic within it that's to do with these layers of relationships, the known versus the unknown. You know, there's layers of vulnerability and things like that that show why something as so exalted and so profound as ihsan is being used to describe our relationship with these people. Okay, inshallah. So think about that because it's very powerful. The other reason why it's really important to think about is because we're all remiss. So, you know, so I spoke about taking employees and people that work for you, people whose wages you pay for granted, right? And but also the same thing applies to relatives, to family members who we take for granted, especially if there's a power dynamic, especially if we have power over them, like there are children, husband and wife power dynamic, parents and children power dynamic, which functions in stages. So initially, parents have power over children. Children grow up, become adults. Parents become elderly. Now children have power over their parents, and the more time goes on, and the older the parents become, the more their power diminishes, and they become more and more vulnerable uh, uh, to their children. And the more the children can take advantage of them, the more helpless they become. Essentially, they go through. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the stages of life in terms of strength and weakness. Allah الذي خلقكم من ضعف أو ضعف ثم جعل من بعد ضعف قوة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who created you from weakness, and then from your weakness He gave you power. ثم جعل من بعد ضعف قوة, i.e. from childhood He gave you adulthood, where you now have power. ثم جعل من بعد قوة ضعفا وشيبة أو ضعفا وشيبة. There's two ways to recite it. And then from power, from that position of power, He gives you weakness again. He transitions you back to weakness and old age. Shayba is old age. يخلق ما يشاء. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates however He wants. So the point of the matter is that we go through these stages, and that gives us a kind of, we transition from being the weak to the powerful, to back to the weak again, and this impacts on our social relationships, right? How we are, how we behave, and so on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points these things out for us to reflect on, because if we reflect upon it, we realize that there are implications, and those implications have something to do with dependence, independence, people being dependent upon you, and so forth. Okay, so that's basically, I wanted to just quickly reflect on that. So ihsan, therefore, is the best that you can be towards another. There are some ideas around that coming up here, inshallah ta'ala. I'm dying for a sip of this coffee, so I'm going to take it now. Okay. I didn't load the chat today, so I'm sorry if you guys are saying things and I haven't seen it. And I haven't even looked at YouTube today. Apologies to you guys too. Yeah, it's here. So if whoever's on YouTube, inshallah, if you wanna post something on the chat, I'll see it now. I think maybe I've added a bit of pressure, right? I mean, there is a pressure here, but ittaqullah mastata'tum. We try to attain piety and fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the best of our abilities, but it's useful to know the standard. We can't afford to be lax about these things. And if you know where you need to go, then you know what you're working towards. As opposed to a state of heedlessness where these things don't matter. Behave how you like, react how you like, that kind of thing. And we do it more and more where we can get away with it. So usually the very people Allah emphasizes good treatment towards are the people that get neglected. So anyway, I've spoken, so the neighbor, the relative I've spoken about in various ways, inshallah. So now we move on to a couple of lines or sentences about the immediate family, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَدِّبْ أَهْلَكَ وَارْفُقْ بِمَا مَلَكَتْ يَمِينُكَ. Teach adab, teach the correct etiquettes, the correct modes of behavior to your family. This can also, mean other things, like when they do wrong, hold them to account and so on. And be gentle towards those whom your hand possesses, i.e., so again, I'm going to contextualize it and say, that nowadays we're talking about people whose wages you pay, people who work for you, people who have that kind of relationship with you, in that they have to render services to you because you pay them. With regards to them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, be gentle. Simple. Sorry, Imam Muhasibi here in this particular line says, be gentle, right? Be gentle with them, because they have to do they have to work for you. They have to do their job. They've got no choice. There can be consequences, serious consequences to them not doing what they're doing. So the accountability factor is already there. You turning into a tyrant against them is only going to make life difficult. It's just going to add tension, and it's not even necessarily going to increase their productivity, right? You can rule with fear, but ultimately it doesn't work. So therefore, be gentle with people. Chances are you'll get more out of it for yourself, right? But also you get more out of them, because then not only will they work because they have to earn a wage, but they will also work because they are loyal to you. That's provided they are people of good character. Of course, if somebody worked for me and they weren't a person of good character, khalas, that's the first thing. That's the first person specification missing, right? That's, if you think of that as a skill. So that's a different issue. But if we were to assume that they were good, they're good people, and we can also not just train them in employment skills, but also train them in ideas around amana and good character and so on. It doesn't, even if they were non-Muslims, these can be part of our training regime as a Muslim employer, and we can discuss these things in universal language. And then in turn, for them kind of behaving in the manner that's expected of them, we are gentle towards them. Chances are you get more productivity out of them. Even in management now, in management theory, which I have, as an amateur, kind of studied quite a bit. I'm supposed to have a qualification on it, but I don't think it means anything. It's one of these on-the-job qualifications, although quite a high-level one. But anyway, in my reading of management theory and so on, the whole kind of management theory has also transitioned from a kind of very top-down from seeing top-down management styles as being effective, to more empathic management styles as being effective. Ones that kind of where leaders and managers seek to understand and be empathetic towards the employees and what they're going through and their circumstances and their experiences, and how putting themselves in their shoes and conducting business in that manner yields greater results and gets better productivity. And better productivity in the business context makes you more money. Simple as that. That's not an excuse to not monitor, not expect amana, and not expect accountability, and not making people accountable. That's not what I'm saying at all, because if that's what you take from this, then your business will fail. It's as simple as that. Okay, I can tell you that, guaranteed. You have to have both. You have to have the accountability mechanisms in place, and then you have to, but your general demeanor and your treatment towards them should be, you have your processes. There's no, I don't know why I'm talking about business, but anyway, there's no kind of, there is no getting away from processes. So you have your processes. That happens anyway. Processes are to some extent almost automatic, right? But then rifq, that's recommended here, or your gentle demeanor towards the people that work for you is a reflection of your character, of your personality, of how you are towards other people. That's very, very important. And sometimes that can inform policy, right? So that processes have an element of empathy within them, so that it's possible for a person, for there to be a personal touch if a person has extenuating circumstances, rather than being automatically penalized and so on. That can also happen. But those are other conversations. But it's extremely important to consider how Islamic ethics and Islamic moral standards and characteristics can permeate every aspect of life, which is why I took the time to kind of just share some thoughts, even around business, because that's what it should mean, because to work for a Muslim should mean something. It should mean something. It should, Muslim employers should be popular, because we have a certain standard that is divine, that is informed by our deen, by our moral standards. Is that the case? Well, that's not what the evidence says, sadly. Yeah, we have this strange mishmash between Muslim employers taking advantage of Muslims, as well as Muslim employees taking advantage of Muslims and putting the brother card and the sister card and all of that stuff. It's quite bizarre, actually. Okay. Moving on to family. He says, he mentions teaching adab to one's family. There's a couple more comments on here, but I'll say it after this next line. So he says, وَكُنْ قَوَّامًا بِالنَّشَاطِ كَمَا أَمَرَكَ. And be a qawwam, I'll translate in a minute. Be a qawwam studiously, or bin nashat, with alertness, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered you. So where has Allah ordered, where has Allah ordered that, and who has He ordered it to? Allah has ordered that to men. So that's why I separated. I thought the others are kind of gender neutral, whereas the idea of being qawwam is specifically commanded to men, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a gender specific context, says it in Surah An-Nisa, where He says, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض. And it's an interesting concept. It's sometimes controversial in feminist circles. It's misused and abused by men in certain contexts and so on. But the idea is, a man is a qawwam over, so men are qawwam over women. Again, not translating, right? So الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men are qawwam over women. بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض. Because of what Allah has preferred each over the other with. This wording is very interesting, and this is my own reflection, and I've been reflecting on this for a long time. But this wording is interesting. If you strip away all other commentary, just think about the wording. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say here, He doesn't say بما فضل الله الرجال على النساء, بما فضل الله بما فضلهم الله عليهن, or something along those lines, meaning He doesn't use gender specific language here. He says because of what Allah has preferred each of them with, meaning the position of qawwam given to the man is something that the man has been favored with, but also the position of having a qawwam over you in the case of a woman, so being under the qawwamiyya of the man, again not translating, so the man having that role and the woman being the man being the subject of the role, the woman being the object of the role, the recipient, if you like, of somebody who has that role over them, are both things that Allah has preferred each of them with. So and Allah used the word fadl, which means grace, it means preference, it means virtue, it means all of those things. So the man has this position, it is Allah has graced them with it, Allah has preferred them with it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made that their virtue. The woman has been given this other position, and He has preferred them with this position, and He has graced them with this position. He has given this position as a virtue, meaning that there's if you consider it carefully, then there's positives and negatives in both situations, in both of these gender specific roles. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, it was my decision. It's my decision to give it to you. It's my decision to make men, and to say to them, you are qawwam. It's my decision to make women women. No one else decided. Nobody chose to be a woman. Nobody chose to be a man. Nobody decided for you that you will be born a man. Nobody decided for you that you will be born a woman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it's my grace. I decided. I gave you these positions. And I've given men a role and women a role from my grace. Right? And that means that in that role, I've given preferential treatment to each of you, which has meant each of you has certain advantages and disadvantages. However, men have the role of qawwam, which is the point. Men have the role of qawwam, which is a role of authority. Now coming to translation. So qawwam therefore means, qawwam is a leadership-based role, the role of the amir. And qawwam is the one because of against whom the family stands. The family depends upon. ما يقوم به الأمر قوام, right? ما يقوم به الأمر. Anything that something else is dependent upon. So the one that the family institution, the wife included within that, depends upon. What would they depend upon? Right? So there's one part to this that the Quran spells out. وَبِمَا أَنفَقُوا مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ. That clearly, spelt out clearly, one factor in that dependency is that they are the breadwinner. They are the one upon whom the family depends for their daily bread, for money, for sustenance, for provision. Right? And some of the perks that come with being the leader or the amir are in lieu of that burden. There's not too many people in this class, right? And I'm trying to be as clear as possible. So there is clearly there is a perception that the position of being leader, of having even a fraction of authority, is advantageous because it creates a power dynamic, as a result of which, a person is looked upon differently, and so on. So there is an advantage. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in just before this verse, calls it a daraja, a degree of advantage. Right? So he says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. Right? Actually, he says that somewhere else. I think. Yeah. So that women have as much rights as they have duties upon them. But men have a degree over them. And that degree is qawwamiyya. That degree is qawwamiyya, that men have been given this role of being qawwam. The Quran is clear about this. And Allah is saying it's His grace. Okay? And nobody chooses their gender. Therefore, nobody chooses this role. The role comes with who you are. You were born man, you have this role. You don't like it, tough luck. Still have to do it. All right? So this is interesting because of the fact that it's precisely this Quranic prescription. This is not an option. This is not some sort of idea that the Quran is floating out there. No, the Quran is prescribing this upon the genders. And we live in an age where that is being challenged. Right? I am a qawwam in my family. The amir, if you want to call it that, or the breadwinner, if you want to call it that, the man of the house, if you want to call it that. You can throw out as many cliches and as many platitudes, positive ones, negative ones, whatever you want to call it. But the Quran uses a term that places a burden on my shoulders, which is qawwam, right? whether I like it or not, I have to fulfill that role. I don't have a choice. Why haven't men been given a choice? Which is another interesting question, right? Why does a man not have a choice? Because there are aspects to a woman's life that she has no choice in. So therefore, men have been given no choice when it comes to the responsibilities of being qawwam. You have to be the breadwinner. You don't want to be a breadwinner, don't marry. You don't want to provide for your family, don't get married. You're not ready to be married. As simple as that. You want to be a lazy bum, don't get married. Okay? Why am I putting it in that way? Because too many men think it's an option. But they still want to be qawwam. They still want to be the amir, the leader. They still want to call the shots. And this is why I said that the first duty of the qawwam, the first thing is the qawwam is the one upon whom others are dependent. The dependency part that Allah spells out is provision. They have to provide. And the fuqaha say a man who doesn't provide for his family has basically they lose their right to marriage over this woman, in the sense that the woman immediately has grounds for divorce. She needs to provide no further justification other than to say he doesn't provide for me. Simple as that. There is no choice or option in this matter. Yeah, if a man, ends up disadvantaged in some way and a woman chips in, etc., etc., the Prophet ﷺ said she gets double the reward. She gets double reward because she is now showing something that she's doing something that she doesn't have to do. She's showing this generosity of spirit, right? Whether she does that out of love or loyalty to, or commitment to her children, or loyalty to her husband, whatever she does it out of, or the goodness of her heart, right? She gets double she gets double the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which usually implies some sort of immense reward that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't specifically measure, because he will just keep giving. Why this generous reward? Because she's doing something she doesn't have to do, right? So, but she doesn't have to. She can simply say, I'm sorry, but I'm not, I'm not, I don't want to be married to a man that doesn't provide for me. And people, and somebody might turn around and say, yeah, but are you not being really what do you mean not being, like, a woman, nobody can say to a woman, you're being selfish just because he doesn't provide for you. You're saying you want to break up the family, etc., etc. What do you mean it's his one job. It's like, that is it. It all starts from there. Allah has given me, as a female, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has naturally disadvantaged me with, and this is the point about, there are things that a woman doesn't have a choice in. If we want to raise a family, right, which is both, which is an embedded expectation in a marriage, right? It's one of the objectives of marriage, not the objective, but one of the objectives of marriage. And the means to children, which is sexual relations and so on, the biological means to that, it is the basic right of the man. It cannot be denied. That's another obligation upon a woman. So men have obligations that they have no choice in. A woman, this is one of the things that a woman is obligated to provide. Implied within that is bearing children. She doesn't have any choice in that matter. A man can't get pregnant even if he wanted to. Right? You see my point? So therefore, she shouldn't have to worry about money and provision. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has completely freed her of that. She doesn't get that. She has every right to walk away from that man. Okay? So that, it's very, very important. It's really, really important to basically remember that. And the reason why I'm putting it in these terms is because I want both genders to understand that there are things you don't have a choice in if you want to be a good Muslim, for a woman, the role of the wife, the 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 fulfilling one's duty, both as a a wife in terms of fulfilling the function of uh, of of being a mother to children, bearing those children, and so on, is part and parcel of being a wife, right? Part and parcel of being a woman. And for a man, providing, and along with that, protection, all things that the family depends upon. What does the family depend upon? Provision, protection, uh, the leadership, right? The kind of being a kind of pillar of authority. It's from that position that this idea that that a wife should obey her husband comes in. But that obedience, the fuqaha say, is in the context of his rights. So that if he has certain rights, then she has to obey him in those things. I believe everything else should be anything else. And also there are certain dynamics. So sometimes a husband is much older than a wife. That he's much more world wise, and so on and so forth. So sometimes these dynamics impact upon the nature of the relationship. Sometimes they're similar age, etc. So they're much more chilled with each other, and the relationship is different. But when things come to a head, there is a responsibility he has, which he has to respect. So he can't be lax about it, and she has to respect, because Allah has given him that responsibility. So these things are extremely important to understand, and these things do come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not some cultural baggage. Okay, now what's Imam al-Muhasibi saying to the man? He's saying, kun qawaman bin nashat, be alert with regards to your role as a qawwam, the man, right? The way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded you. Don't be neglectful of it. It's extremely important that you take this job seriously and you do it diligently. Okay? It's awful out there, by the way, because I counsel on these issues, and it's just terrible. Right? The level of irresponsibility in men. And some psychologists even say that this is somewhat fed by this idea of over-empowerment of women. I'm not saying women shouldn't be empowered; they should, but women don't need to be empowered in a way where the role of the man becomes irrelevant. Because you do that, in the end, it's women that suffer the most, right? You work your socks off, maintain the family. The man decides, oh, I can chill. I don't have to work too hard anymore. She's bringing in 50% of the income, and he starts to, because he doesn't have the burden of qawamiyah that Allah has given him, that is natural to his disposition, right? He kind of relaxes. Illa mashallah, some brothers and men are great in that they contribute everywhere else, but most don't. It doesn't come to them naturally. So the woman finds herself doing her 9 to 5. Then a lot of Muslim women will relate to this, right? I don't know about other cultures. I can relate to Muslims because their cases come to me. The woman comes home from work and finds that, hang on a second, someone's got to do the dishes, someone's got to do the washing, someone's got to do all of the housework. And it's not, looks across at her husband. He's just come home from work. She's just come home from work, but he's out, and she's thinking this stuff has to be done. And she almost naturally also takes on that role, because that's this, call it a stereotype, call it a natural instinct, call it what you like, but this is what ends up happening. So she's still cooking, she's still cleaning, she's still doing all those things. All right. And if this, let's just say she's not doing those things and the husband takes care of that stuff, she's still a mum. So if they have children, if they're gonna have children, she's the one that's gonna bear the children, and then she's going to naturally, having born them, be a mother to them. there is a natural attachment there that she struggles with, right? And then she's got to go back to work after her maternity leave, which is a struggle for many. For most mothers, naturally, that's a struggle. That's a difficulty. And they go back, and the dynamic doesn't make sense. So most people say, so practicing brothers and sisters and couples, they say, but this is unavoidable nowadays because, and obviously I live in London, so most people living in cities like that will be like, okay, but you need a double income, otherwise you can't buy a property, etc., etc., etc. Fair enough. Then accept that this is exceptional. Accept that. So accept that it's an exceptional situation, that necessity has forced this situation, and try to make sure that you have aspirations to basically to not normalize this forever, because it isn't, because it's not natural, because and make sure that your dealings reflect that. Because if a woman is earning and contributing towards the family, then she should get her due in terms of ownership of property and things like that, because of the fact that she's doing something that she isn't obligated to do. Right? Look, that's one thing. The second thing is, none of this means that a woman can't earn money. It just means that there are some distinct, that there is a primacy to her role, to her domestic role, right? Wife, mother, homemaker, that kind of thing. There is a primacy to that, and none of this means that a man can't do the domestic, can't contribute to the domestic part as well, right? And to the family and so on, and raising the children and helping out at home and so on. It doesn't mean that, but there is a primacy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has emphasized something for the man that makes that one of his primary duties, one that he cannot avoid. So it's about primary roles. Secondarily, the man that can do other things and contribute to other things. You know, after everything that he does outside, there's still a home that he comes back to. There's still children. There's a family, and a woman also, in addition to everything that she does at home, she may have other interests: education, deen, community, society, other women, as well as earning money. But naturally, she doesn't need as much as the man, right? Just talk in terms of UK or income in London, right? A man's £40,000 income, after all of his obligations, what's left, right, is the equivalent of a woman's £10,000 income. In fact, the woman is going to end up with more left over. If you were to think of it from an Islamic dynamic, in the sense that she doesn't actually have to spend any of that money, because all the obligations are upon it, all the financial obligations are upon him. So there's an imbalance when both are equal participants in pursuing careers. There are two imbalances. One, there is a financial imbalance. If the man also seeks to discharge his role as qawwam, he still has all of the financial responsibility. So if a woman is pursuing a career because it's her insistence, because she's career minded, then there has to be a give and take, a balancing out of the responsibilities and the financial duty and obligation as well, because he naturally, the man will end up at a massive disadvantage. It is unfair in that situation for a woman to say, oh, the man has no rights over my wealth. Or actually, no, in order for you to have your career, he has not been able to, he has not received his full due. He has had to, sorry, in order for you to have a career, he has had to compromise the things that are due unto him. And one of those things is actually that he has that he is able to come home to his wife at home, who doesn't have to worry about other things other than her domestic role. That is the fact of the matter. And nowadays women hate hearing this. They hate hearing this. It's like, how can, really, is this all we are? No, that's not all you are. You're a wife isn't it's not a slur. Being a wife, right, isn't a swear word. When did it become a swear word? Being a mother isn't an insult. Being a homemaker isn't an insult. The modern world, it never was. It hasn't been for thousands, tens of thousands of years, right? The modern world made it like that because the modern world manufactured a rivalry between men and women in order to in order to in order to create the economic climate that it wanted to, which ultimately advantaged rich men. At the end of the day, right? The powerful became more powerful, the rich became richer, the majority of whom are men. So good luck. So feminism is the invention of men, basically. Or even if it isn't the invention of men, it certainly advantaged them even further. And it didn't advantage good men, it advantaged bad men. Okay? So there's something really bizarre and strange about all of this stuff, that basically we have to reflect on. I've totally lost track of time, by the way. So Imam Muhasibi, I said I wasn't going to get past the first paragraph today because of this, right? So Imam Muhasibi talks about this issue of Qawwam, and he talks about men taking this role seriously, which implies that they have to be the leader of the house. They have to be the one that the family depends upon, and that means the family has to function in a way that allows him to fulfill that role. Okay, like I said, that doesn't take away other opportunities for a woman, but it does mean that the structure of the family has to allow him to fulfill that responsibility, and he has to take that responsibility seriously. Okay, inshallah ta'ala. And now if a woman wants to contribute because the economic climate is tough and so on and so forth, then she may, a husband should be grateful to her, right? And she should do it because it's a necessity, right? Not some sort of, I don't know, not, and it shouldn't necessarily become the norm. All right, inshallah. Anyway, so this is another, big issue, right, that I wanted to discuss. I wanted to put out there. I felt a little bit disconnected in my thoughts today, so I hope I've done some justice to it, inshallah ta'ala. If there's any comments, I'll quickly have a look at them. If not, we will close there. Okay, so okay, somebody's saying totally agree with your explanation of qawwam. With authority comes responsibility, which is a burden, which is therefore compensated by certain perks. Yeah, if you want to call them perks. I'm proper, like, traditional in these kind of things. All right, I'm telling you, this burden is not nice. If you take it seriously, right? It's a serious one, and I it's not about my duty to my wife and my children. It's not so much about that. They're forgiving. It's really about how I'm going to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this role, for this responsibility. That's the bigger issue. I mean, if you're a good man to your wife, and she's a good woman, then you forgive each other's slip-ups. If I can't earn the amount of money that my family deserves or should have, or that gives them a comfortable home, and etc., etc., they will forgive me for it, right? But have I done my best, and am I going to be accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that? Am I remiss somehow? Have I fulfilled my other obligations as somebody who inspires? Whose job is it as qawwam to inspire religiosity in the family? Whose job is it? Primarily, if you're the qawwam, dependency is on you, so it primarily falls upon the man. That's not a responsibility that he can take lightly, right? And men get it terribly wrong. They get it terribly wrong. It's hard because they haven't educated themselves and prepared themselves for a role like that. Most importantly, they haven't invested in their religious education, so there's nothing that they can give to their families because they themselves are ignorant. right? Then there's the responsibility of bringing up those children, okay? You know, and keeping your wife comfortable, and all of these things are massive burdens. So um, there's a massive problem at the moment. Basically, the family institution has been completely disrupted, and it's disrupting society. Society is getting is suffering the brunt of it, and sadly, probably the group that suffers the most is children. Children are suffering the most as a result of this disruption. Okay, inshallah ta'ala. All right, a couple of points here on YouTube. To what degree does the woman have to cook, clean, and look after the man? If she asks the husband to help out regularly, can he decline to say this is her duty? Yeah, that's a difficult one. Well, if it ever comes to the point where she asks the husband to help out, you know, can he decline? I don't like answering questions like that. I'll tell you why. Because I always read things into these types of questions. Always. And there's always a story that's not being told to me. And I don't mean that about the person who's asked the question. I'm talking generally. Generally, there's details in the story that I'm not aware of, and then what I say gets used, right? By both sides. In a healthy relationship, these types of questions are somewhat irrelevant because these things are worked out, and therefore there's no need. There's no need to bring it up. Usually, whenever it's brought up, there is a context that the alim or the person, the scholar who's being asked a question is unaware of. For example, when a wife asks for help from her husband, is it because she's struggling with the load, right? Is it because she's already doing way more than what she is obligated to do because she's taking care of the husband's parents, she's cooking and cleaning for them, you know, and so on, right? Is it because she's doing that because she's also doing a job? She also has a job, part-time, full-time, regardless. She's also got a job, and her job, but not in a context where, you know, she gets to keep all of her money, but she's actually contributing towards the home because the husband expects that. So there's a context here. Does she need help because she has elderly parents who she's trying to also care for, which impact, meaning when is it laziness? Is it because she doesn't care, or is it because she actually does need help? And if she does need help, and there's all these other contextual details, then why should the husband decline and say that it's her job? She's in this situation because she's overburdened. Anybody could ask you for help. Why would you decline? That's my point. My point is the request for help in a context where she actually needs it? Because why would a wife not help her husband if he needs it? And why would a husband? It's like in a healthy relationship, if a husband said, you know what, my job's just not paying enough, you know, I think you're going to have to take a job as well. It's a massive burden on her, right? But if it is indeed demanded by their circumstance, then in 80% of situations, if it's a good healthy marriage, she would try and find a job and contribute and help out. It's exactly the same situation if a woman is asking for help in the house. Why would the question even come up of can he decline? It's just a question of why. Yeah, if she's lazy, he's doing everything that he's supposed to do. He brings home the income, he takes care of things, etc., 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 etc. She doesn't have a great deal to do. It's not a massive house with no help and etc. and so on. What she's required to do is well within her capacity. She's not overburdened by it. She isn't unwell or anything like that. She just wants to chill on social media. Yeah, perhaps in that situation, a man can, not from the point of view of fobbing her off, because it's his wife and he's supposed to love her and help her as much as she can, but from the point of view of making her understand that she is remiss in her role and she's being lazy. A husband can say to his wife, "You're being lazy," if he does it in the right way, right? So it's never as straightforward as, oh, she's being lazy and I'm being asked to help out. It's never as straightforward as that. That's why I sometimes refuse to answer questions which appear to have a straightforward answer. Actually, there isn't a straightforward answer, because the fuqaha disagree about whether a woman has to do any cooking and cleaning, which makes it even more complicated. Okay, inshallah ta'ala. So that's why this issue of how housework is dealt with together and whether the man shares or not and so on is really one that it's best done together. And I think, and again, I'm not making any assumptions about the questioner here, I often find that 80-90% of the times, when people have to ask whether they can deny, whether they can say no to the other person, when a person has to ask that, that my husband, when one has to raise the issue of my husband never helps out around the house and so on and so forth, is usually in a context of a wider set of problems than just this. It's never just that, never. Unless we're dealing with two completely unreasonable people, which I have good opinions of people, and in most cases that's not, although that also happens, right? Just like you get husbands who are bums, sit at home and benefit, don't want to go to work while the wife is struggling. You get the exact reverse, where a man does everything, comes home, his wife sleeps half the day, does nothing, the house is messy, etc. He's coming, he's trying to, you get these extremes. But in that situation, it doesn't, the question isn't necessary. It's obvious that somebody is remiss. Okay, inshallah. If the husband works and wife has to work, and the man limits his earning due to nafil and sunnah, should the man sacrifice nafil duties or even sunnah duties so he can provide for, if you're insufficiently providing for your family? I don't get that question, right? Or why would your nawafil get in the way of your income? And why would you acknowledge that your income is insufficient and then say, I want to earn less, so that I can fulfill more nawafil? I don't understand. I don't understand why the two can't be done. It's not an either or. Why is this such a dichotomy? If your family's needs are not being fulfilled by the income that you have now, yes, separately, a wife is enjoined with patience. Try to be patient, try to help, and so on and so forth. And a man, listen, mate, it's your job. Go and find a way to earn more money. Your nawafil are yours. That's down to you. That's a false clash. It's a false dichotomy. There shouldn't be one. Find a way to earn more money. Right? Should I do my nawafil or not? Yes, absolutely. Well, if I have a job, it's really, really tough, etc. I can't get up for tahajjud. Well, it's not obligatory. These aren't difficult things to deal with. Do the best you can, but do your duty. And part of that duty is to be the breadwinner. Sometimes that may impact upon your nafil ibadah. Well, if that creates an unhealthy dynamic in your family, I think the answer is clear. You've got to take that issue seriously. Yes, you're a family that is steeped in piety, and there is qana'a, and there is no expectation of great income. You all agree to live a simple life. We don't want to spend too much money earning money. We want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be educated in the deen. If you share those values, you won't have to ask me the question, because that's already sorted. If you don't share those values, right, and there is the normal expectation of a home, normal expectation of a car, the normal expectation of providing clothing for the family and so on, like the normal social status of others like you, and you are unable to do that, and you're saying, I'm not going to do it because I have to do nawafil, I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense, right? Your nawafil are not fara'id. but your status of qawwam is a fard. When the fard clashes with a nafal, the fard takes priority. And if a person does that duty for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a ibadah. This is the other thing. If a person cannot do their nafal, they want to do nafal ibadah in the ritual worship sense, but they despite having a desire to do so, and despite doing so on the weekends and when they can, they aren't able to do as much as they can, because they go and strive to earn a livelihood, do 60 hours instead of 40, and perhaps they don't have a high earning job, so the 40 isn't enough, so they put in extra hours, and they don't do any nawafil except on their day off. That the earning is a ibadah. Okay, inshallah. The earning is a ibadah because we do it for the sake of Allah. Allah gave us that role. Bima faddalallahu ba'dahum ala ba'd. Allah is the one who graced us that responsibility and gave us that response, right? So we shouldn't do these things just from a dunyawi perspective. Even the role of being the breadwinner has an ukhrawi perspective to it. It's for the akhirah. It's for Allah. The same thing with being a wife and a mother and a homemaker. It's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It isn't for the husband and for the dunya. Okay? Barakallahu feekum, Jazakumullahu khairan. I've gone way over time. Must stop there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.